Just give you a few brief thoughts about some of the changes that I think are coming in the computing world in the next few years, and then we can move on to a question and answer program. This morning we just came from a session where one of the themes was celebrating, commemorating 50 years of computing in Mexico. And in fact, the history of computing as we know it is not substantially longer than that. But the changes that are coming in computing in the future, in the next 10 to 20 years, will be larger than the combined changes that we've seen over the last 50. And when you look at the incredible changes in computing over that period of time, that's quite an impressive statement. Some of the things that will bring this change will actually bring some substantial pain to the world of software development. The people who make the microprocessors have reached a point where the physics of the microprocessor no longer allow it to be made faster by increasing its clock speed. And so you have been, for the last few years, seeing this change where now if you buy a desktop or notebook computer, it has a 1-core, 2-core, 4-core type machine. But this will accelerate quite dramatically, and in 5 to 10 years it might be normal to have as many as 50 or 100 cores on an individual chip. But these will have to be programmed in quite different ways than that which we've known in the past. And so parallel programming will become a skill, and the tools will have to be evolved in order to do that. Otherwise we will not be able to avail ourselves of these dramatic changes in the power of computing. But we've been working for many years to prepare for this change in our research and development activities, and I'm quite comfortable that in fact as the machines begin to arrive in the next 5 years or so, we will find good ways to deploy them against these new problems. This huge change in computational capability, I think, will allow us to make fundamental changes both in how people interact with computers and the tasks to which we apply them. Computing, as we know it today, grew out of improving productivity in the business environment, primarily in big businesses and then coming down to medium-sized businesses. In countries like Mexico, where the predominant business environment is small and medium companies, even today, only a quarter of the companies in Mexico use information technology at all. And so I think, similarly on a global basis, only 1.5 billion of the planet's 6.5 billion people really have any access to technology at all. And so I think there's a broad requirement to apply computing to a new class of problems and to make it usable to people in ways that we have not been able to do in the past. So one of our focus areas is in trying to find ways to make the interaction between computers and people much more similar to how people talk with the people or interact with people. And in doing so, we would lower the barrier dramatically in terms of how many people on the planet would be able to use computing in some important ways. Some of those ways, of course, will be to continue to make advances in engineering and science, which should help us provide solutions to many of the engineering solutions to many of the world's tough problems, like energy and some of the other technical fields. But I think it will be equally important to find ways to use these technologies to improve healthcare, education, and create improved productivity for the rural poor, or even the urban poor, particularly the rural poor on a global basis. I mean, today, I guess the numbers I saw were about 47% of Mexicans live below the poverty line. And while that represents more than 40 million people here, if you look at countries like China and India, they each have 600 million people who live below the poverty line. And so the numbers are quite staggering. And then you could add Indonesia and most of Africa. And clearly the world has many people who need to find some way to improve their quality of life over time. And there's no way to scale the traditional models that the rich world knows, including the rich parts of Mexico, in terms of healthcare and education, to all these additional people. So it's my belief that one of the highest purposes that computing will be applied to with these advances is to come up with novel solutions to address the world's challenges in healthcare, education, and rural productivity. And with that, begin for the first time to make some substantial improvements in this global quality of life. Now, obviously, every aspect of productivity in business will, I think, step up to a new level of computing. Computers are more likely to become like great personal assistants as opposed to just something that can fetch a piece of information on your request, and will therefore become more helpful, and that should improve people's general productivity and the satisfaction they get from using these computerized tools. I think new forms of creativity will continue to emerge. If you look at the media today, both in terms of how it's created and increasingly how it's consumed, you know, it's moved beyond the traditional one-way broadcast models of radio and television into a much more dynamic and even user-generated model of creativity in media. And I would expect that those trends will continue and accelerate. I think in communications will ultimately also be revolutionized by these changes. The historical distinct models of telephony and facsimile and email and instant messaging and SMS, you know, will give way to a much more unified concept of computer-mediated communication. And as the technology evolves and broadband connectivity continues to improve, we're likely to see that with more and more of an emphasis on television.